Hi, and welcome to AXSChat. Today, we're really pleased to have Dina Moati with us. Very excited that Dina's work in education, bringing on the next generation of people that are going to be nurturing people with accessibility needs. So, Dina, welcome. Very pleased to have you with us. I know you've joined us a number of times for the Twitter chat, and it's great to have your support, and it's great to have you with us here today. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be working in accessibility? Because we all have a story as how we ended up in this arena.
So it really started after graduating from university, and I had done a lot of workshops on accessibility and inclusive practices and what have you. And then I joined a school which as a grade 4 teacher, and it was quite an interesting experience because, as I was mentioning before, it was the reality of theory versus practice. And that really enforced my passion for inclusion. And started learning some more, did my master's in education with a focus on subject area option and a couple of special ed courses. And then I transitioned slowly into my role as a prof in the educational support program. Personally speaking, I think accessibility ties in with inclusivity, and I'm from a different background, and to me they kind of go hand in hand, right? Because you have to create an accessible, inclusive world in order to make a difference.
Okay, absolutely. I'm with you all the way. Accessibility is only one part of the overall diversity and inclusion agenda. Obviously, it's a more technical to a large extent than some of the other areas, but it's only part of a bigger picture. Totally agree with you. So I know when we've been talking offline, you were talking about the school system in Canada and how there is support, but there is a drop off. And in the UK, we were talking about it being sort of almost completely reversed. But tell us a bit about that and your experiences of how you're preparing people to make the transition to higher education.
So as I was mentioning before, that in Canada we've got the K through 12 system, which provides students with disabilities with a lot of services and access to specialized instruction, assistive technology, and what have you. But our students are they're not advocating for themselves. You've got the parents, you've got the special ed teachers, and you've got the system in a way that's advocating for them and for their needs. And then they go into post-secondary, and there's a gap there where transition is not really enforced in a way where, you know what, right now you need to advocate for yourself. There's a lot of grants and awards and support services for students with disabilities, but not all of the students know about that. And in Canada, there has been a better focus, if you want to call it, on transition programs, on prepping students. So as I tell my students in the educational assistant program, the end goal is really for students with disabilities to be interdependent. We don't want them to be independent. We don't want them to go to the system and be on their own and then it's a sink or swim mode. We want them to be interdependent in a way where when they know they need help, they go and access the help. And our goal as educators is really not to advocate for our students, but rather teach them how to advocate for themselves, to be self-advocates. So that's my experience with the Canadian system and how I kind of tie in the both.
Okay. One of the things that came up on a couple of our previous chats, both with David Leposky and with Denis Boudreau, was the fact that each individual state has its own accessibility laws. So does that also flow through to differences in states in the education system as well, with that accessibility in education?
For sure. So in Canada, we've got special bursaries for, in Ontario, we've got special bursaries for students with disabilities. I'm not aware of the different programs that they have in different provinces, but there are some differences in funding, but I'm not aware of the specific amount of funds and programs. Every province has its own programs, but the names differ, and the application and the amount of funding and services available. But you are right, yes, it does differ from one province to another.
Okay. Well, it's quite interesting that one of the things that I found was support is patchy, and universities had an environment where it was within their interest. It was definitely in their interest to help students come forward about their disabilities and to give them help, because actually the way that it was set up in the UK, funding is based on league tables and exam success and everything else. So the universities quite quickly cotton on to the fact that if they didn't help these students, they were likely to be losing out on additional funding because they weren't hitting the results, which has had the knock-on effect of universities and higher education in general being actually a very disability-friendly place in the UK, because even as you put in your application, you're already asked whether or not you have a disability, and your application form actually almost automatically triggers the process for the disabled student allowance grant, which then
Okay.
triggers everything else off, which is fantastic. But then we get the drop off when people transition into work.
Yeah, and that's another challenge. So what you're saying right now makes more sense to me in terms of how students are supported in the UK, because in Canada, um, on your application, you do not identify that you do have a disability. You actually have to go to the accessibility offices in the university or at the college and then self-identify and say, I've got a diagnosed disability and I'm trying to access the services. So it's not on the application form. And when I worked as an accessible advisor at Sheridan College, oftentimes we would get messages from the people in the OTR, the Office of the Registrar, saying that, we're receiving all those IEPs and we've got to shred them because of confidentiality, right? So students have to go and self-identify and tell the advisor that, I'm trying to access help.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Deborah, I know you've got a question.
and are they applying online, or they need to go and fill in everything in paper? What's the process?
So the process is they have to go to the Ontario website and then they apply. They put in one application, but they have the option to apply for 3 different programs, different colleges and universities, and then based on the acceptance, they would go to the college or university and go through orientation and self-identify. Here's the thing: there are a lot of orientation programs, and it is mentioned on the website. But then again, from my experience as an accessible learning advisor, you get students who come into you for help, excuse me, midterm, and they say, we didn't know. Right? We didn't know that these services are available. Or you would get faculty coming in and saying, this student is really struggling. And based on a conversation I had with them, they said that they did receive extra help or support in high school. Right? So it's really about navigating the system and going through loops to find that, yes, services are available and funding is available for bursaries and assistive technology and specialized services.
Okay. And as part of that, when the students, when they are on the first year, are sometimes they may have a disability that they never realize that they actually have. So,
Absolutely.
what is done for how those students are being supported, and what resources are available in order to go into that direction?
For sure. So when a student comes in and they say, or oftentimes it's really the faculty, they suspect that might have some learning differences, then what the Accessible Learning Services Office They do referrals. So they send students for psychoeducational assessments to assess their learning, if there are any discrepancies. And then based on that, if the psych ed assessment comes back with a learning disability or any kind of diagnosed disability, then they are referred to a learning strategist, assistive technologist, and an accommodation form is created. But in Canada, the student does have to have a diagnosed disability, and for a psych assessment, it needs to be updated, because we all know that once a student with a disability is an adult, then that learning disability is lifelong, right? It's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Dina, in the United States, it sounds like there's a lot of similarities. We have a lot of support in our K through 12, and not quite as much. We're working on it in our universities. Some of the universities are better at it than other universities, but I am, it's still a work in progress in the United States. And since we are the United States, every single one of our states handles it differently, and sometimes within our states, well, always within our states, the different cities and counties handle it differently. Just where I'm located in Central Virginia, and there are 4 major counties where I am, and they all are doing it differently. Some of them. Anyway, we've got a lot of work to do in the U.S. But I'm curious if, in the efforts that you're making, and I saw you, especially you've been, have been very gracious with your time on AXSChat, and I have seen some of your students join AXSChat, and you're very supportive of them, and that really impresses me, because it's so important to support and empower each other. But I am curious of, after, are y'all doing specific things once the students, they're navigating their way, hopefully through college, to help them move into the workforce? I'm just curious what you are doing with that, and that might not be your focus.
Yeah, so I don't do that work anymore, but when I used to work with accessible learning, we did have a transition program for students who were going to work, and it was absolutely amazing. The accessible learning services would put in a one-day workshop where it was trying to find jobs, how to go for an interview, whether to disclose your disability or not in the interview, and a lot of learning and coping strategies, and a lot of advocacy skills, because that's really where we need to do a lot of the work, where students advocate for themselves and they talk about the disability in a way where it's not, oh, is it going to hinder me, right? Like, how can I provide strength for the organization that I'm going to be working on despite my disability, or how can I turn my disability into an asset to the company? So that's what the accessible learning services they do. I don't do work with them anymore as a prof, but many of my students attend that.
Well, and Dina, I think you bring up such a good point, because one thing that, as a parent of a child with Down syndrome, it is always interesting. As I moved into this field to try to really, be one of the many voices of disability, inclusion, accessibility, I had experts telling me they didn't really want the parents in there, because the parents won't let go. We cause problems, and we're not in some ways welcome. Which all of that is true. We do sometimes cause problems, blah blah. But I think the point that you made, in that they have to know how to advocate. The parents have to know how to advocate for them. They have to know how to advocate. They have to know how. And I'll go back to something that Neil did recently. Neil wrote, and maybe he can address it after I finish this point. But Neil, as a successful man that is dyslexic, he wrote an opinion piece about almost coming out as a dyslexic. And I think one thing that we've got to do is we have to empower people to be who they are, and at the same time tap into why, just picking on Neil, why is Neil a better director, a better leader, because he has dyslexia? Why is he, and why has that given him advantages maybe to somebody like me that didn't struggle with dyslexia? I had other struggles in my life because I think that's what it's about. But I think helping people understand how to advocate for themselves and how to show why their autism or the dyslexia or whatever it is, why it can add value in the workforce or in society as a whole. And Neil, I don't know if you want to jump in right there or give it to Dina.
Okay. I'll give it to Dina, and then I'll jump in.
Putting me on the spot. I see. You know what? I love the quotation that says, "A community that excludes one member is not a community at all." Right? And we live in a diverse community that's full of different languages, different abilities, and different cultures. And it's just rich and beautiful. And the thing is, to me, is because I come from a different background, right? And I tell my students this story. I'm not diagnosed with a disability, but I was never able to do math. Never able to do math. I did not like, and I should keep my voice down because my daughter is listening. I don't like math. I was never able to do math. But the thing is, I directed my strength somewhere else. I had a love for reading and writing. I had a love for education. I come from from a family of educators, and I directed my energy there to use my strength to compensate for my challenge. I don't like the word weakness. And I tell my students the same thing. Being different is unique, right? Every person has a certain challenge and every person has a certain strength. And we need to empower our students to find their strength in order to give back to the community, and in order to empower them, and in order to help them advocate and find their spot in the world. And I want to go back to a point that Neil made about students transitioning. You talked about, I believe, the assessments in postsecondary. And here's the thing, a couple of years ago, the rates for students who had autism, who were joining postsecondary, was just increasing. It was going up. It's not because students were, or individuals were, more individuals were diagnosed with autism, and maybe that's the case, but it's because we were more welcoming of, you know what, it's okay to have a disability. Come to colleges and university. We've got programs and we've got services to support you. So it was not a stigma anymore, right?
Sure.
Where if you have a disability, you can't do it at the post-secondary. You have to go to work, right into the workplace. So it's really about building a system and a community of practice that welcomes not just diversity, but differences and the strength of being different.
So that neatly segues into what I wrote about. I wrote about neurodiversity and how people need to come out, because actually the stigma that people on the neurodiverse spectrum, or spectra, because it's multiple spectrums, feel is akin to how it was to be lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender previously, because you're not accepted by society. Unlike with physical disabilities, there is the expectation that you're somehow stupid, and that's
or
really
lazy.
not okay. Or oh well, yes, I was called a dilettante
Yes.
and a daydreamer, which to a certain extent I agree with, but it doesn't make me stupid. I chose, like you did, to focus my efforts on the things that interested me and that I was good at. I'm also pretty bad at maths. However, that has led me to invest my time investing and investigating dyscalculia, which is a really fascinating topic, and working out ways that we can make the internet more accessible for people that don't like maths. But I think that, like the gay rights movement, actually people who are neurodiverse want to change society's perceptions, and we need to do that collectively, and that means that we need to actually be brave enough to come out, be talking openly about our issues and both our strengths and our weaknesses. I'm quite happy to tell people about the areas that I'm weak in, because I'm now confident enough to be able to know that I'm strong in other areas, that I see things differently, that I can think strategically, whatever. But it requires mentoring, and it's incumbent upon the older generation of people with disabilities and in the profession to pass on those skills, that knowledge, and that confidence to the next generation. And that's why it's really important, the work that you're doing, because you're building that skill set, and also the setting people up to be successful and to be open, and therefore hopefully moving the sort of societal acceptance forward. Because I think now, as same-sex marriage is pretty much legal everywhere in the world. You wouldn't have thought that 15 years ago. It's moved really quickly. So as people create these movements, and we are part of a movement, I believe strongly that we are
100%.
That we must continue to advocate and continue to talk about and continue to be open about it, so that we can create completely a cultural shift, because that's what I think it requires.
100%.
Anyway, I've taken up too much of your airtime here, so.
I just want to add one point. It's funny you mentioned that, what's the story that got you into accessibility? Yeah. And many of my students in the educational support program, they come to the program because they've been touched by a story or for a passion that they have for accessibility. And I was having a conversation one time with a friend, and we were talking about accessibility and ramps and design, universal design and what have you. And she said, I've got a friend of mine who she's extremely serious about accessibility because her dad is in a wheelchair. And I said, that's amazing, but it's a shame. I think we all need to take accessibility as personal, right? We don't have to wait until our life is touched by a disability to take it personal. It is personal to me, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So I think if we don't talk about accessibility, we talk about the stand back movement, where I'm just going to stand and watch. It's beautiful that you talked about the movement and shaking things up and disruptive movements where, let's make some change. But I tell my students, it doesn't have to be something major. It could be a Facebook post on World Autism Day, right? It could be a tweet on, I saw this and I think this needs to be improved, right? It's little things, and it could be as big as AXSChat. I think your group is doing an amazing work, and I love following the feed, and I love the passion behind it. So I want to thank you for that. Honored to be here today.
Thank you. I think you're right. I'm not saying everyone should be like the three of us standing up proselytizing the whole time.
Please do.
But it's my job, it's my passion, and also Deborah's, and I know that Antonio's very come to this through me, but is equally passionate. But I think you're right. Each individual action helps add weight to that argument, and the more people we can encourage to feel comfortable to do that, the better.
But there's another point. It's not just that we need to talk that between ourselves. We need to join and talk with other communities.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the rationales why we didn't turn this into, AXSChat.
We also wanted people to join. Just kidding.
Yeah. but we're not technocratic. It's about people.
And I'm just kidding, because Neil and I are both on WCAG.
We've got
we love them.
Yeah, we've got 24 minutes before we're due on a call, and I think I'm reviewing a document about distractions, which is pretty much my life online. But so, where do you see education going in terms of inclusion and accessibility? What are the things that could be improved, and what do you think is good right now?
How much time do we have?
Ha.
That's gonna be a long. No, I think honestly that we've done a good job. Are we there yet? No, not yet. There needs to be a lot done, but I think we did really well when it came to creating those specialized services, right? Our students can go to schools with average students, right? But accessibility is not just about physical proximity, or inclusion is not about just physical proximity, right? Inclusion is about creating that sense of belonging and making sure that UDL is being implemented in the classroom. So I think we've done a good job, but there are a lot to be done, more to be done.
Okay. Yeah, I think again you're making a great point. Kevin Carey, who's chair of the RNIB, he's got a horrible term, but it's a great concept, and that is about peer normative task completion. So the idea that essentially you should be able to do something with the same ease. That's equality. It's not everyone's different, and your ways of accessing may be different, but it's about this being able to do something as easily as the rest of the population,
for sure,
differently.
And we have to keep in mind that fairness is not sameness, right?
Yeah.
Many people confuse that and say, well, it's not fair to my other students. Well, different people need different things. And this is why I love universal design for learning and differentiated instruction, where it speaks to every learner in the classroom and you're meeting their needs.
I'm stealing your quote. I know.
I was just going to tweet that too. That's excellent. Fairness is not same.
It's not mine. I don't take credit for it, but I've read it somewhere, and it spoke too much to me. Fairness is not same. It's so true, right?
Yeah, that's a great saying.
Yeah, it really is.
So, one of the things that I see I worked in the education sector for quite a long time, providing assistive tech to students. And one of the big surprises to me was moving into enterprise and working for an enormous big company and finding out how difficult it was to deliver accessibility in that sense, because of a lockdown nature of the systems that we provide. That's changing, but how is the provision put in place in the universities? Because individual students in the UK got their own computer, they got the assistive tech put on there. Now that doesn't mean that the university systems are accessible or whatever, but they're kings of their own castle, as it were. They have admin rights, they can do whatever they like with the machine. That means that the AT is easier to run, etc. Who provides that kit? Is it the universities, or do they have to go out and buy it themselves? How does the system work?
So again, it goes back to the psychoeducational assessment and the individual needs of the students. The program that I'm in, it's a mobile computing program. And at my college, we have a lot of mobile computing programs where students are required to bring their own laptops with them. That being said, if they do have an identified disability and they have an updated psychoeducational assessment, then they are eligible for assistive technology. And keep in mind, income plays a role and all that kind of stuff, right? But there are available services for students where they work with an assistive technologist, and they can load specific programs on their computers, such as Kurzweil, Dragon, JAWS, different programs based on their needs and based on their accommodation form. So there's a system for it in place. Does that answer your question, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
But it's an investment. So when they need to buy a laptop or a phone, is an investment for the families. Is there any type of support that is provided to them to make sure that they are able to make the right choice?
Okay, so to answer your question without confusing you, it's a bit complicated. So if the program requires a laptop, then all students are required to bring a laptop, right? But if the program I've been out of accessible learning for 4 years now, so I want to make sure that I give you the right information. But as far as I remember, if the program does not require a laptop, and a laptop is required to make the learning of that student successful, then there's a bursary for it. But when it comes to assistive technology, those programs are required to make learning more accessible for students, right? And then based on the bursary and the psych ed assessment and accommodation form, the assistive technologist would be able to add those programs. But it's a bit complicated with funding and policies and whatnot. But to answer your question, yes, there are programs available. There is support available, and students learn to navigate through the system. We have an amazing accessible learning services office, and people there try to provide students with the best things they can provide to make their learning and learning journey successful, I should say, because student success, I believe student success is not just about an academic one, it's about a social one, an emotional one, and an academic one. So
I think
stop
that's
there.
Yeah.
we want to produce rounded individuals.
Yes, yes, absolutely, 100%.
Excellent. So I think we've just about reached the end of our half hour. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank you.
really interesting chatting with you.
Thank you.
Look forward to joining you on Twitter tomorrow night.
Yes, honored to be here. Keep up the good fight, and you guys are amazing. You're awesome.
Thank you, Dina.
Thanks. Cut.